Fishing has always been a peaceful and meditative activity, casting a line into the water, waiting for the pull, and soaking in the quiet beauty of nature. But, like many things in life, not all fishing trips go as planned. Sometimes, what starts as a relaxing day by the lake turns into a nightmare. Tonight, we're diving into 3 unsettling true fishing horror stories that will make you rethink your next trip to the water. From paranormal encounters to horrifying experiences on isolated shores, these true scary horror stories will chill you to the bone. If you love chilling narratives, chilling scares, ghost stories, haunted stories, and tales from the unknown, make sure to like, subscribe, and share. Let's begin with these terrifying tales, if you dare. This story is about the silent fisherman. Our first story takes us to a remote lake nestled deep in the woods, far from the comforts of civilization. Jason, an avid fisherman, was no stranger to solitude. He loved heading out to the lake with his boat, casting his line into the still waters, and enjoying the quiet. One particular evening, he ventured to his favorite secluded spot, a little-known cove surrounded by dense trees. As Jason settled in and cast his line, the only sound was the gentle lapping of water against the boat. But after a few hours, things began to feel off. The air grew thick and still, as though the world itself had become unnaturally quiet. It wasn't long before Jason noticed something that made his blood run cold. At the far end of the lake, just beyond the mist, he saw a figure standing on the shore. The person was wearing a dark coat, hooded, and stood completely motionless. Jason couldn't make out any features, but the silhouette was unmistakable. The figure was too far to make out any details, but Jason couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. After a while, the figure simply disappeared into the mist, leaving Jason feeling unsettled. But he shook it off. After all, he was out in the middle of nowhere, and there were plenty of strange things in nature. He tried to focus on his fishing, but the eerie sensation lingered. Hours passed, and just as Jason prepared to call it a night, the figure reappeared. This time, it was much closer. Almost too close. Standing at the edge of the dock where Jason had left his truck, the figure stared, unmoving. There was no sound, no movement at all. Just the unnerving stillness of the lake and the mysterious figure. Jason's heart pounded as he realized that the figure had no boat or way of reaching the dock. It was impossible for anyone to have gotten there without being noticed. His mind raced. Who was this person, and how had they gotten so close without making a sound? Frozen with fear, Jason started his boat's engine, but before he could make a move, the figure vanished. Gone, just as quickly as it had appeared. Jason didn't wait to see if it would come back again. He gunned the engine, speeding back to the shore, his heart racing in his chest. As Jason pulled up to his truck, he was relieved to find the parking lot empty. He wasn't sure if he had imagined the figure or if something more sinister had been lurking nearby. The feeling of being watched didn't leave him, though, and to this day, Jason avoids that particular lake, never daring to return. The silence of the waters, the ghostly figure, and the overwhelming sensation of dread were enough to convince him that the lake was hiding dark secrets. Some places are just haunted, and some fishing trips are better left untold. Jason later heard from a local fisherman who told him unsettling stories of similar sightings in the same area. This fisherman explained that many visitors to the lake had reported feeling an overwhelming sense of isolation, as though they weren't meant to be there. Some described seeing shadows flickering in the trees or hearing whispers carried by the wind. No one really knew who or what the figure was, but it seemed to be tied to the lake's history, an area that had been isolated for generations. Locals warned that once you made contact with the entity, it would haunt your thoughts, never allowing you to forget. Jason also discovered that a few fishermen had gone missing over the years. The official reports attributed the disappearances to accidents or poor weather conditions, but whispers in town told a different story. Some said the figure on the shore was not human at all, but a spirit bound to the lake, forever watching, waiting for the next soul to claim. Jason's encounter had made him a believer in the unexplainable, and while his curiosity about the lake lingered, he knew deep down that some mysteries should remain unsolved. This story is about the ghostly catch. Our second story takes us deep into the swamps of the Louisiana Bayou, where one fisherman encountered a haunting he would never forget. Robert, a seasoned angler, had heard rumors of strange occurrences in the bayou, stories of ghostly apparitions and disturbing sights. He'd always chalked them up to local legend, never taking them seriously. One evening, Robert set out on his boat, determined to make the most of the day's fishing. The sun was just beginning to set, casting an orange glow across the murky waters. As he floated deeper into the swamp, he heard the soft rustle of something moving in the water, perhaps a fish nibbling at his bait. But then, Robert's peaceful outing took a dark turn. He felt the tug on his line and began to reel it in. At first, he thought it was just a large fish, but when it broke the surface, his heart skipped a beat. Instead of the typical fish he was used to, Robert was faced with something far more terrifying. A human hand, pale, cold, and lifeless, rose out of the water, gripping his fishing line. Robert's heart raced as he yanked his rod away in a panic. He looked around frantically, but there was no one in sight. The water had returned to its glassy stillness, and the bayou seemed as quiet as ever. But the hand remained a vivid image in his mind. In a state of shock, Robert didn't hesitate. He started his boat and sped back to shore, the eerie silence of the bayou pressing in on him like a heavy weight. As he returned to the dock, he heard something faint, a whisper carried on the breeze. A voice. But not just any voice. The voice sounded like a woman's, faint and distant, yet close enough to send shivers down his spine. It was soft, pleading, as if it was begging for help. Robert couldn't make out the words clearly, but the chilling tone of the voice haunted him long after he left the swamp. Over the next few weeks, Robert found himself plagued by strange dreams, dreams of a woman lost in the swamp, reaching out to him for help, her voice echoing in his ears. It was as if the bayou had cursed him, binding him to the dark forces that lurked beneath its waters. One night, he could take it no longer. Robert returned to the swamp to confront whatever had been haunting him. But when he arrived at the same spot where he had caught the ghostly hand, all he found was the eerie silence of the swamp. The whispers, the woman's voice, and the hand were never fully explained. But Robert's peaceful fishing trips were never the same. The paranormal activity of the swamp had latched onto him, and no matter how far he went, they followed. The whispers grew more persistent over time, often waking Robert in the dead of night. Sometimes, he would hear soft tapping against his window, almost as if something was trying to get in. And every time he ventured into the bayou again, the atmosphere seemed heavier, more oppressive, like something was watching him from the shadows. Even his fellow fishermen began to notice the change in him. Robert was no longer the man who had loved peaceful days on the water. He had become a shell of himself, pale and sleep-deprived, haunted by memories of the bayou. One fisherman, a local who had lived in the area for years, warned him that the swamp was home to vengeful spirits, lost souls who had drowned in the murky depths, and whose presence was tied to the very waters. Despite Robert's growing fears, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being drawn back to the swamp, as if the bayou's paranormal grip was tightening around him. Every night, as he lay in bed, the sounds of the woman's voice and the ghostly whispers would echo in his mind. It was as if the swamp had marked him, and its dark, haunted stories were now his own. To this day, Robert no longer goes near the bayou, but the whispers never truly left him. They followed him to his new home, always lurking in the background, faint voices that only he could hear. They were his constant reminder that some fishing trips uncover far more than just fish. Some trips lead to encounters with the unknown, and once you're touched by the spirits of the swamp, there's no turning back. This story is about the creature of Lake Blackwood. Our final story takes us to the remote and isolated Lake Blackwood. The locals rarely spoke about the lake, but when they did, their words were full of fear and mystery. Many claimed that the lake was haunted, that strange things lurked beneath its waters. Jack, a young fisherman, had heard these stories his entire life. He'd grown up in a small town by Lake Blackwood and had always thought it was just superstition. But as he got older, his curiosity got the better of him, and he decided to venture out on the lake for a solo fishing trip. The lake was as beautiful as it was eerie, dark waters surrounded by dense trees, the perfect setting for a peaceful fishing day. Jack launched his small boat and paddled out to the center of the lake, casting his line into the murky water. Hours passed without incident, but just as the sun began to set, Jack felt something strange, a sudden, heavy tug on his line. He thought he had caught a massive fish, but when he reeled it in, he wasn't prepared for what surfaced. It wasn't a fish at all. A large, twisted creature, its skin a sickly shade of green and covered in scales, emerged from the water. Its long, clawed fingers grasped the boat's edge, and its eyes glowed a faint red as it stared at Jack. Its mouth opened, revealing rows of sharp, jagged teeth. Frozen in terror, Jack could only stare as the creature slowly dragged itself closer, its long, spindly limbs dragging behind it. It let out a low, guttural growl, a sound that vibrated in Jack's chest like an ominous warning. Suddenly, the creature stopped. Its head tilted to one side, as if studying Jack with unnatural curiosity. Then, with an unsettling screech, it dropped back into the water and disappeared beneath the surface. Jack didn't wait to see if it would return. He paddled back to shore as quickly as he could, his heart pounding in his chest. When he reached the dock, he collapsed in exhaustion and fear. The next morning, Jack returned to the lake, hoping to find some explanation. But the water was still and calm, the creature nowhere to be found. The locals, when asked, only shook their heads and muttered about the dark things in the water. Jack never returned to Lake Blackwood. The memory of the creature, the way it had looked at him, its glowing eyes, haunted him for the rest of his life. He couldn't shake the feeling that something ancient and malevolent had risen from the depths, and it was watching, waiting for the next unsuspecting fisherman to cast their line. Over time, Jack became consumed by his encounter. He would often hear the faintest whispers, like distant calls carried by the wind, beckoning him back to the lake. He started to question whether the creature was real or if his mind had been warped by fear. But deep down, he knew what he had seen was no mere hallucination. The townspeople, too, seemed affected by the lake's dark energy. Those who lived near Blackwood spoke of strange occurrences, boats found adrift with no one aboard, inexplicable ripples in the water during calm, windless days. Some claimed that the creature was a guardian of the lake, a restless entity that only emerged when provoked. Others believed it to be the vengeful spirit of a long-forgotten creature, bound to the waters and seeking to drag anyone who dared disturb its domain. A few months later, Jack overheard a local fisherman at the town bar recounting a story from his youth. He claimed that his grandfather had been one of the first to fish at Lake Blackwood when it had still been a pristine, untouched spot. The old man swore he had encountered the same creature decades earlier, its glowing red eyes following him from the dark waters, a warning to stay away. But what unsettled Jack the most was the fisherman's final words: "Some things were never meant to be seen, and some things are still waiting." Jack never spoke of the creature again, but the fear that had gripped him lingered long after he left the town. The dark, silent waters of Lake Blackwood held a terrible secret, one that would remain locked beneath the surface, waiting to be discovered once again by those who dared venture too close. Fishing may seem like a peaceful and relaxing activity, but these three unsettling true fishing horror stories prove that sometimes the water hides more than just fish. From ghostly hands and eerie whispers to creatures lurking in the depths, the dark secrets of these lakes will make you think twice before heading out with your rod and reel. If these stories gave you chills, be sure to like, subscribe, and share for more terrifying tales from the unknown. Stay safe out there, and remember, not all fishing trips are meant to be enjoyed.